Hi, I'm Celine. 3 years ago, my parents took my engagement ring, said it was for polishing. The next thing I knew, my sister was walking down the aisle, in my dress, wearing my ring, with my fiancé. Everyone smiled. No one said a word. They called it fate, said I was too sensitive, said she was just helping out. But what if they didn't just betray me? What if they always planned to replace me? What happens when the people who raised you are the ones who orchestrated your erasure, piece by calculated piece? Would you forgive them? Or would you make them watch you rebuild everything they tried to take? I wasn't expecting red carpet treatment, but I also didn't expect to see my name at the corner of the dining room near the swinging door that led straight to the kitchen. It was the kind of seat you gave to someone who might need to excuse themselves often, or someone you didn't expect to stick around long, not to the bride-to-be. I blinked, thinking maybe I misread it, but there it was. Celine, same delicate calligraphy as the rest, same ivory cardstock I had hand-picked, just relocated. I stood there a second too long, the hum of laughter in the background growing sharper, like it had noticed my hesitation. I picked up the card and carried it to the center of the table. "Mom?" Beatrix turned, wine glass in hand, smiling with the kind of energy she reserved for charity luncheons and well-funded guests. "Oh, sweetheart, there you are. The caterers needed more room for the servers near the main table, so I shifted a few things." "You'll be fine there, closer to the drinks." I stared at her, trying to find a trace of malice or even mischief, but she moved on, tossing her hair and whispering something to Seraphine, who let out a soft laugh like velvet slipping off glass. It wasn't just the seat. It was the way my dress still hung in the garment bag in the hallway, while Seraphine floated around in a fitted cream number, no less elegant than a bridal rehearsal dress, and the way Malcolm barely glanced at me all night, eyes flickering to his phone between shallow small talk with my uncles. Every time I tried to catch his gaze, he looked just past me. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone out to the back patio, I found him near the fireplace texting. I slid in beside him on the edge of the velvet love seat. "Did you ask Mom to move my seat?" His fingers hovered above the screen for a moment. "What? No, why would I?" I waited for eye contact. It didn't come. He set the phone down, but too slowly, like his thoughts were still in it. "She probably had a reason. You know how she gets when she's in planning mode." I didn't push further. Not then. But the air between us was changing. I could feel it, like sitting in a house where the foundation has cracked, but the walls haven't shifted yet. You don't see the damage, but your body knows it's there. The next morning, while we were setting up the flower arch in the backyard, Mom pulled me aside near the kitchen. "Your ring," she said, holding out her hand. "I'm taking it in for polishing and resizing. The jeweler says it might need a slight adjustment before the photos tomorrow." I hesitated. "We're not taking engagement photos until next week." She waved that off. "Just in case, don't worry, I'll get it back by tonight." It was a ring I designed myself, a thin platinum band with interlocking arches inspired by a cathedral I saw in Barcelona. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every line, every bend was me. That evening, she returned without it. "They're keeping it overnight," she said breezily. "The jeweler said the cleaning solution needs a longer soak." I nodded, though a pit had settled in my stomach. When I caught Seraphine in the hallway later, she smiled, tilting her head just so. "That ring, it would look good on anyone's hand, don't you think?" I stopped. "Why would you say that?" She gave a laugh, high and rehearsed. "It's a joke, Celine. Relax, sis. Don't go all detective on me." That was the thing about Seraphine. She always knew how to sound light while pressing her heel just deep enough to bruise. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was being oversensitive, told myself she was just making conversation. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. As the night quieted and guests started to trickle out, I passed by the guest room on my way to the stairs. The door was slightly ajar. Her suitcase sat near the end of the bed, one corner unzipped. I hadn't intended to look, truly, but something in me slowed down. I paused, leaned slightly, and there it was, my ring box. Nestled among her silk scarves and makeup bag like it belonged to her, like it had never belonged to me. I stood there for a breath too long, long enough to feel the air tighten around me. I didn't knock. I didn't call her name. I just turned and walked back to my room, every step echoing something I didn't want to admit yet. And that's when I realized I wasn't paranoid. I was being replaced. The morning light cut through the shutters with a precision that felt uninvited. I blinked into consciousness, ears catching the muffled rhythm of laughter downstairs. Plates clinking, footsteps light. There was a kind of cheer in it that didn't match the knot curling in my stomach. I took my time getting dressed, moving slowly through the motions. When I finally came down, the table was already full. Fresh fruit, warm muffins, linen napkins folded just so. Seraphine was at the center, her hair loosely tied, glowing like someone who hadn't been up late manipulating shadows. Beatrix was pouring coffee. "There she is. Good morning, honey," she said, without turning her head. "We're just finishing up here. Want eggs or toast?" My chair was already pulled out, next to the kitchen door again. I slid into the seat, trying not to look directly at anyone. "Is my ring back?" Beatrix didn't pause. "Still at the jeweler's? He said it needed extra buffing. You're overthinking." "You know how important it is for it to sparkle in the photos." "Did he call you?" "No, I called him," she said. "Let me handle the details. You've got enough on your plate." That was her tone, the one she used when she wanted me to stop asking questions. Sweet, like honey that had turned bitter after too long in the sun. Seraphine laughed softly at something Malcolm said. I didn't catch the words, only the way he leaned slightly toward her, his elbow nearly brushing hers. I wasn't hungry, but I peeled a clementine anyway, focusing on each piece like it might offer me a different answer. I caught it then, the scent, my Burberry, the one I left on the vanity in my bathroom. "Seraphine," I said, are you wearing my perfume?" She blinked, then gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I thought you left it in the guest room. You weren't using it." "It wasn't yours to take." "I didn't take it," she said, her voice light. "I borrowed it." "God, Celine, relax." "You're always so possessive." Beatrix let out a gentle laugh. "It's a perfume, not a family heirloom." But it wasn't about the perfume. It was about a pattern. That afternoon, as I wandered through the hallway trying to avoid another round of flower placement discussions, I overheard two cousins chatting by the staircase. "She got cold feet, apparently," one of them whispered. "Poor Malcolm. He looked so rattled. I heard she's been spiraling for weeks. Maybe she wasn't ready." They didn't know I was there, and even if they had, I doubt it would have mattered. From across the room, Beatrix offered them a tight smile. "Let's not judge. Some people just aren't built for commitment." I stood still. My heart didn't pound, it stilled. Because it wasn't just what she said, it was how easily she said it, like she was laying down groundwork for a story I hadn't agreed to. "If you don't tell your story," I remembered reading once, "someone else will, and they won't tell it right." Later that day, I found Malcolm alone in the den. He was sitting on the armrest of a chair, staring at the fireplace like it had answers for him. I sat opposite, careful to keep my voice level. "Do you still want to marry me?" He flinched slightly but didn't look away. "It's all happening fast, Celine. Maybe we need to slow down." "You mean you need to slow down?" I said. He scratched his jaw. "It's not about needing space. I just think you're overwhelmed, The stress, the planning. I cut him off. Or maybe you're already somewhere else. He didn't answer. I stood, gave him a look I hoped he'd remember. Say it now or don't say it at all. But don't stand in two places and pretend that's loyalty. He stayed seated. That was answer enough. That night, as the house quieted, I passed by the study. The door was slightly open, and I heard my mother's voice, low and even. We can't let her ruin this. She doesn't know what's best for her. I froze in place. Her words fell like stones into water, each one dragging deeper. Another voice, maybe Seraphine's, murmured something in return, but I couldn't make out the words. I backed away, careful not to make a sound. My breath held tight, my steps deliberate. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased. 2 weeks before what was supposed to be my wedding, I began to feel like a guest in my own life. It was subtle at first, appointments being moved without notice, phone calls returned with vague delays. The cake tasting I had scheduled months in advance was suddenly shifted to a better time, but no one had told me. I found out because the bakery left a voicemail thanking Seraphine for coming in early. The florist canceled. Double booked, my mother said with that tone she used when she was hiding something behind her teeth. We'll just simplify. Maybe the universe is telling you to keep it elegant and clean. Clean, like I'd somehow made things too messy. I didn't push back. I was still clinging to the idea that maybe this was just how weddings worked, that everyone lost a little control near the end. That's what I told myself, at least. But there were things I couldn't explain away. Malcolm had stopped calling at night. We used to debrief about our days, laugh about the little hiccups of planning. Lately, he responded to texts hours later with one-word answers. Busy, he'd say. With what? I wanted to ask, but didn't. Then came the morning that shattered the illusion completely. I woke up early, still in my apartment in San Francisco, with plans to drive down to Santa Barbara for the final vendor walkthrough. As I reached for my phone, a notification lit the screen, an Instagram tag from one of my cousins. I tapped it open, and there she was, Seraphine, standing under the very arch I helped design, in a white silk dress with lace trailing behind her. Malcolm beside her, in the same navy suit he'd worn for our engagement shoot. The caption read, "Love finds its true path." I stared, unable to blink. It was the same venue, the same flowers, even the ring, my ring. The cathedral-style platinum band I sketched on a napkin, handed to the jeweler with a nervous smile. I dropped the phone. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It whispers so loud, it drowns everything else out. The kind that doesn't just break your heart, it rewrites reality. And when that photo reached me before a single word from anyone I called family, I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a rerouting, deliberate. I got in the car, heart pounding, and drove straight to the boutique where I ordered my wedding dress. I needed to touch something that was still mine, something that confirmed I wasn't losing my mind. The owner met me with confusion. "We canceled your order last week," she said gently. "We received an email from you, or someone using your email, saying you were rethinking your direction." My voice came out smaller than I expected. "That's not even how I speak." She tilted her head, hesitant. "It was formal, very structured. Said you were stepping away from the event. I'm so sorry. I thought you had changed your mind." I hadn't. I returned home and checked my sent mail. There it was, an email I didn't write, time-stamped the day I left my laptop unattended in the family living room. It had been sent from our home Wi-Fi. The group family chat, once filled with daily updates and reminders, was now quiet. But when I clicked into social media, cousins had already posted group shots from the ceremony. Everyone smiling. #Dwyer wedding. No one mentioned me. Not even a text. I called my father. What happened? There was a pause. A too long pause. It was too late to fix anything, he said. She was already in the dress. Guests were arriving. It would have been chaos to undo it all. She was in the dress? I repeated. He exhaled, tired. Sometimes life rearranges itself for a reason, Soline. No apology, not even a shred of guilt. Later that week, a friend from college who had seen the wedding photos online messaged me. She'd attended, unsure if she should, but now wanted me to know what she saw. She sent a picture from the guest book, an entry written in my mother's handwriting. So happy for you both, Seraphine and Malcolm. You two were always meant to be. I read it twice. The ink was dark, the loops of her letters unmistakable. There was no doubt it was hers. I didn't lose a wedding. I lost a whole identity. 2 days after their wedding, I walked into a coffee shop downtown to escape the stillness of the house. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the dress boutique, and I didn't trust myself to hear another well-intentioned lie without unraveling in public. I stood in line behind a woman with a familiar face. High school, maybe. She turned, brightened with recognition. Soline? Wow, it's been years. You looked radiant in those photos. I blinked. Sorry? Your wedding photos, they were stunning. That dress, the flowers, just perfection. Something inside me twisted. Where did you see them? Instagram. You're trending, actually. She smiled as if that were a compliment. Soline Hadley wedding. Wild, right? I didn't remember responding. I left my coffee on the counter and stepped outside, phone already in hand. I opened the app, and there it was. Dozens of posts, photos of Seraphine and Malcolm under the arch. Me, tagged. In the captions, in the comments, in the metadata of a life that was never lived. I scrolled faster. Some of the group photos were from family accounts, my uncles, my cousins. In one, I stood at the edge of the frame, clearly mid-step, cropped from the reposts. At home, I passed the staircase to the family room and saw the gallery wall, our family portraits. The one of me and Malcolm from our engagement shoot had been replaced. Same frame, new photo, Seraphine and Malcolm, matching blue-toned outfits. My mother must have ordered the print fast. The frame still had a tag tucked behind the glass. It's one thing to be forgotten. It's another to be overwritten. Later that night, I sat in bed, laptop on my knees, watching an episode of a design podcast that Seraphine was featured on. I didn't expect much, mostly platitudes and self-promotion. But then she said it. Design to me is like emotional architecture. You don't just build walls. You create spaces people can breathe in. I had said those exact words in an interview 6 months ago. She smiled into the camera. And when you find a partner who understands that foundation, you just know. The host beamed. Malcolm seems like that kind of partner. He's more than that, she said, flipping her hair. He was meant for me. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stared at the screen. She didn't just want my man. She wanted to become me. Only without the scars. Beatrix called the next morning. Dinner tonight, just us. Time to catch up and move forward. I showed up because I needed answers, not closure. The house was filled with the same smells I remembered growing up. Roast chicken, rosemary, faint whiffs of lemon oil from the freshly cleaned floor. We sat around the table like actors between scenes. Beatrix raised her glass. To fresh starts, she said, and to finding the one you were meant for. They all raised their glasses. I didn't. I watched them, my mother, my father, Malcolm's parents, even Seraphine, laugh at stories I used to be part of. My seat was technically at the table, but it didn't feel that way. Afterward, I walked out into the driveway, car keys in hand. My phone buzzed. An invitation. You're invited to the 1-month anniversary brunch of Seraphine Malcolm. The sender, my mother. There wasn't even a message to explain it. No apology, no mistake. I realized then, this wasn't just betrayal, it was execution by exclusion. The ballroom buzzed with low conversation and clinking glasses, the kind of hum you only hear at design expos where everyone's pretending to be less impressed than they are. I'd come to Los Angeles to get out of my own head, to walk among strangers, breathe someone else's ambition for a while. But the moment I saw her name in the showcase guide, my stomach flipped. Callista Interiors, it read. The title of her panel, Redefining Coastal Identity. I made my way through the exhibit, heart already pounding even though I hadn't seen anything yet. The air smelled of espresso and high-end perfume. Booth after booth, glossy portfolios displayed like altars to ego. And then, there it was. Her space. At first glance, it looked good. Too good. Then I saw the curve of the built-in bench, the way it hugged the window corner at just the right angle. My angle. The floor-to-ceiling cedar shelving, the layered lighting plan. Every inch of it was mine, my unpublished project. My original concept that had never seen the light of day beyond the dining room table in my parents' house. A woman beside me clapped. It's so fresh, isn't it? I turned, but she wasn't speaking to me. The presenter at the mic beamed. Seraphine Quinn has brought a new voice to Coastal Interiors, young, crisp, unburdened by convention. Unburdened. My throat tightened. Applause erupted. I stepped closer to the installation wall. A small QR code was fixed discreetly at the base. I scanned it with my phone. It led to a slick portfolio site, Seraphine's debut collection. The domain had been purchased 3 weeks before the wedding date I was never meant to have. As the crowd began to drift toward the next booth, a familiar voice brushed my shoulder. That piece is so... you. It was Nina, a fellow designer from grad school. She didn't look at me, just kept sipping her drink. She knew, and I knew she knew. Later that night, after I'd driven back to my apartment in San Francisco with too many unanswered questions swirling in my head, I opened my laptop. I began searching through old emails, logins, metadata, anything that could confirm what my gut already knew. I found it. An email dated 2 weeks before Seraphine's panel submission, sent from our family Wi-Fi network to an external design firm's address. Attached, the blueprint I had shared only with my family. I'd never sent it anywhere else. I never had the chance. I called Beatrix. She answered on the second ring, her voice already loaded. I figured you'd find out. You knew? I asked. You didn't do anything with it, she replied coolly. Ideas don't belong to one person forever. I swallowed, hard. So this was about what? Efficiency? Branding? We supported the daughter who moved forward, she said, like that was some kind of virtue. And suddenly it all made sense. The wedding, the sudden silence, the missing ring. They weren't isolated betrayals. They were steps in a plan. Malcolm appeared in a photo online later that week, standing beside Seraphine at another panel, holding a clicker, pointing to my design like he had anything to do with it. He had helped her build the pitch deck. Of course he had. That's why he was always too busy. They didn't steal my ideas. They orchestrated a theft in plain sight and applauded each other for the execution. The final insult came in the form of a glossy magazine that arrived in my mailbox 3 days later. I wasn't subscribed to it. Someone had ensured I'd receive a copy. On the cover, Seraphine, in a linen jumpsuit, posed inside a space I recognized immediately, my concept wall down to the plaster texture. The headline read, "The Visionary Voice of Coastal Chic." I held the issue in my hands, heart quiet, eyes burning. Not from sadness, but from clarity. This was never just about the ring, or the man, or the wedding. They didn't just steal my wedding, they launched a career off my silence. I wasn't looking for anything that night. Not hope, not closure. I just needed to get rid of things. After the magazine with Seraphine's face landed in my mailbox, I started purging old contracts, swatches, boxes of drafts, everything that reminded me of the version of myself that everyone else had consumed without permission. That's when I found it. Buried beneath some tax documents and birthday cards from years I could barely remember, there it was, an envelope, handwritten, Rupert Langston, in tight, careful print. My grandfather. The postmark on the envelope was dated a week after my wedding. That wasn't. I sat there on the living room rug, envelope trembling in my hands like it was alive. I hadn't even noticed it in the stack of mail that had come through the chaos. I opened it. Soline, it began, in his steady hand. They will rewrite the world to fit their comfort, but you build real structures. Don't shrink. There was a dried flower taped to the corner of the page, one of the little blossoms that grew near the base of the treehouse he and I had built when I was 9. I stared at it for a long time. They will tell you that your silence is grace, but you know better. You always have. The ones who build must never be afraid of noise. The page ended without any flowery sign-off. Just his name. Just truth. I didn't cry because it hurt. I cried because I felt seen. In all the performances around me, brunches, polished panels, false toasts, I had forgotten that someone once looked at me and didn't flinch when I made noise. The next afternoon, I took my sketchbook to a little gallery cafe in the Mission District. It had an open courtyard, cracked brick floor, and espresso that tasted like someone still cared about small things. I sat near the ivy wall, drawing for the first time in weeks. My lines weren't clean yet, but they were mine. "Is that a cathedral corner?" a voice said beside me. I looked up. He had quiet eyes, a gray wool jacket even though it was sunny. I recognized him vaguely. Malcolm's friend from a fundraiser years ago, Arden Voss. "It was supposed to be," I said, "before everything cracked." He didn't ask what I meant. Instead, he slid his coffee across the table. "You can keep drawing. I won't interrupt." We sat there for an hour without talking. Just two people surrounded by ceramic cups and forgotten plans. I learned later he had left the corporate investment world years ago. By choice, not scandal, not burnout. He just said it wasn't worth the noise. Over the next few weeks, I kept returning to that cafe. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. When he was, he brought tea instead of questions. He asked what kind of pencil I liked. He offered to carry nothing for me and never asked to see what I was drawing unless I offered. One afternoon, I handed him a sketch of a floating staircase framed by glass. It was rough, but the lines felt stronger than they had in a long time. "This one's angry," he said, not unkindly, but sturdy. I laughed. "You always this poetic?" "No," he said, "just honest." I started sketching more. At night, on napkins, on the back of receipts. And he never tried to take credit, never called me genius. He just showed up and listened. Then one evening, as I was washing brushes in the sink, my phone buzzed. It was Nina from the Design Expo. Text: "Seraphine's live streaming. She's pitching your cathedral design in 10. Get online." I dried my hands, heart already racing, and pulled up the link. There she was, on screen. Seraphine, standing in front of a rendering of my staircase, her voice clear, practiced, smiling. "This space," she said, "was born from the idea that height doesn't have to feel distant, that light can live in tension." My words, word for word. I watch the comments roll in, hearts, applause, one calling her visionary. Behind me, Arden entered with a cup of tea. He saw my screen. He didn't ask what was going on. "Want to let her finish?" he asked calmly. "Or want to speak?" I didn't answer right away. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. That night, I opened my mouth, and finally, my voice followed. I didn't move at first. The live stream had been going for 7 minutes by the time I gathered myself enough to sit down and really look at the screen. Seraphine stood in front of a sleek 3D rendering projected behind her, eyes bright, voice polished like she'd rehearsed every word in front of a mirror for weeks. "This design," she said, gesturing to the structure behind her, "was born from the belief that spaces shape us before we shape them. I wanted something that pulled light into silence, that made stillness feel intentional." I knew that line. It was mine. I'd written it 6 months before in a pitch I never got to deliver. Because that space she was presenting, those layered glass shadows, the curve of that staircase, was my design, word for word, line for line. Only her voice filled the room now, and mine echoed nowhere. Arden sat across from me, his expression unreadable. His laptop was open, but he didn't touch it. He was watching me, not her. The chat on her stream was lit up with hearts, fire emojis, praise. So elegant. Visionary. Hire her yesterday. Sponsorship logos blinked in the corner. She was being handed everything I had built, and they called it innovation. I opened a folder on my desktop. It wasn't dramatic, just a small click. Inside were scanned sketches, photos, the original timestamps, my metadata, a thread of email drafts that led back to when I'd first conceptualized the space she now stood in front of. Without saying anything, I uploaded the files to a private Instagram account I hadn't used in months. The caption was simple. "Design isn't just about the space you show, it's about the truth you don't erase." I tagged the timestamp, the studio file, the earliest email. I used hashtags sparingly. #original designer. This was hers. I didn't expect what happened next. Within minutes, the post was being reshared. Dozens, then hundreds of comments started appearing under Seraphine's livestream. "Wait, didn't @Solene Hadley post that last year? This looks like someone else's work. Check her sketchbook, sis." She kept speaking, her voice faltering only slightly, but I saw the moment she caught it, the shift in the chat, the confusion on the faces in the front row. The moderator leaned toward her, whispered something, and then the screen froze. A pause, long enough to hear my own breath. A breaking news alert popped up on my phone. A design blog had published a piece just moments before. Did Seraphine Quinn steal her breakout design? The article included a line that made me exhale for the first time in what felt like hours. Arden Voss, private investor and creative patron, confirmed he saw the original work in Solene Hadley's portfolio more than a year ago. I looked over at Arden. He didn't smile, he just nodded. She came back on screen for a moment. Her tone had shifted, flatter. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties. Thank you for your patience." And just like that, the mask cracked. We didn't speak for a long time after the stream ended. Arden got up, walked to the kitchen, poured tea into the mug I always left near the sink. He handed it to me and sat down again, scrolling silently through the fallout. I received 3 interview requests before midnight. One from a podcast I admired, another from a magazine that had ignored me last spring. I didn't respond, not yet. We spent the next day in silence, not an awkward one, the kind where things settle into place, where truth echoes louder than any speech. Arden sent me a single text from across the room that afternoon. It read, "Truth doesn't need a microphone, just timing." It wasn't until the third day that I got the envelope. White, clean, handwritten, postmarked locally. Inside, a cease and desist letter, a formal complaint, legal language laced with venom. She was suing me for defamation, claiming I damaged her brand, her image, her future. Arden flipped through the pages, brow arched. She just made her biggest mistake. I looked at him. If she wanted a war, I said, voice steady now, she should have checked who she was actually fighting. The envelope came on a Wednesday, hand-delivered, not mailed, ivory cardstock, thick and glossy, elegant cursive at the center. You are cordially invited to a brunch in celebration of Seraphine Malcolm's 1-month anniversary. There was no message, just a date, a time, and the Dwyer family crest printed at the top like nothing had happened. I stared at it for a full minute before setting it down on the kitchen table. Arden walked in, saw the invitation, and said nothing. He slid it back toward me with 2 fingers, then turned toward the sink to rinse his coffee mug. "We're going," I said quietly. He didn't respond, but I felt the nod in his silence. The morning of the brunch, the sky was clear, but the air had that stale heat that clings to tension. We drove in silence. Arden's hand rested lightly on the gear shift between us. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't have to. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the change immediately. The family home looked edited. The planters had been reshuffled. The rug on the porch was new, Seraphine's taste, no doubt. Inside, the walls had been repainted in soft earth tones, warm, trendy, strategic. And there it was, hanging in the entryway, in the exact spot my engagement photo with Malcolm used to be, was a massive framed portrait of Seraphine and Malcolm, smiling like they hadn't stolen a damn thing. My stomach didn't drop. It folded in on itself and then sharpened. I walked in ahead of Arden. The house buzzed with conversation. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed a little too loud. Everything was curated. Seraphine greeted guests with air kisses and the same laugh I used to hear echo from my old bedroom when she was pretending to be the innocent one. I kept moving. In the dining room, guests gathered around a long table layered with white peonies, linen napkins, and customized name cards. I spotted mine, Solene Hadley, placed exactly at the seat closest to the kitchen. Again. Seraphine turned, her voice lilting over the room. "Still solo, sis?" Laughter circled the table. I didn't flinch. "Actually, no," I said, stepping forward. "Arden, darling?" And just like that, he walked in from the hallway. Calm, clean-cut, quiet power wrapped in a navy blazer. He took my hand without hesitation. The room hushed. I continued, "This is my husband. We don't usually do brunches that require name tags, but here we are." Someone choked on their mimosa. Seraphine's smile flickered, just slightly. "You don't owe anyone a performance," I said, mostly to myself, but sometimes silence speaks loudest when it's shared. Before anyone could speak, I reached into my handbag and pulled out a small white envelope. I walked to my father. "For clarity," I said. He opened it. Inside, a notarized legal transfer, 51% ownership of Arden's company, gifted to me the week after our private ceremony. It was my name on the paper, in bold. My future. Mine. Seraphine dropped her wine glass. It shattered, a sharp puncture to the polished calm. Malcolm's face went pale, his jaw clenched. I didn't look at my mother. I turned to the room. I may not know what this event was meant to celebrate, but I do know what I've built, and what I've reclaimed. Silence. Even the background music had stopped. Beatrix stood, trying to salvage something. "Let's not make this a spectacle, Solene." "Oh, I'm not performing," I said. That role was already filled. Then came the click of a camera. A reporter, invited, I'm sure, for Seraphine's exposure, stood near the doorway, snapping shots. One photo would later circulate, me standing with Arden, confident, Seraphine in the background, bent over the broken stem of her wine glass. As we began to walk out, someone near the table whispered just loud enough, "She's the one who built all this, not Seraphine." They stole my stage, but forgot I built the foundation. By morning, the footage from the brunch had made its rounds, edited, clipped, reposted with slow-motion reactions and dramatic subtitles. Someone had captured the exact moment Seraphine dropped her wine glass and froze mid-smile. Another clip showed Arden taking my hand while I stood firm, delivering my words like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The internet gave it a name. The Wrong Bride. I didn't post anything. I didn't comment, explain, or defend. I didn't need to. The silence surrounding my exit that day had become louder than any statement. I watched from the couch, barefoot, tea going cold in my hand, as the news anchors called it, the power shift no one saw coming. My inbox filled with podcast invites, interview requests, op-eds. I ignored every single one. "You don't have to say a thing," Arden said that afternoon, placing a bowl of sliced apples beside me. "They're saying it for you now." And they were. Later that evening, a well-known design columnist, an investor who had quietly attended the brunch, published a piece titled "The Real Architect." He described me as the visionary behind the design that launched a stolen empire. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. Within hours, screenshots surfaced of emails, sketches, timelines, leaked from an anonymous family source. My cousin Ava, I suspected. She had always noticed too much to stay quiet forever. One of the images included a side-by-side of my sketch next to Seraphine's pitch deck. Identical structure, identical phrasing, identical layout, and beneath it all, a quote in bold. "The truth has legs. It may be late to the party, but it always arrives." By noon the next day, Seraphine's brand sponsors had started pulling out. A statement from one of them read, "We are re-evaluating our partnership following recent integrity concerns." The words were sterile, but the intent was sharp. Her followers, once fiercely loyal, began to question everything. Was any of this hers? She's been parroting someone else's story this whole time. Why hasn't Malcolm spoken up? And he hadn't. Not once. No press release. No post. Just silence, which, ironically, did more damage than denial. Midweek, I received a text from Nina. "You're trending again, but this time for the right reasons." Attached was a link to an old video clip, one I'd completely forgotten about. It was from a talk I gave 3 years ago at a small design college. I stood in front of a classroom, nervous but proud, explaining the power of emotional architecture. "We don't just build to fill space," I said. "We build to fill silence. That's where trust lives." That exact line had become the centerpiece of Seraphine's most quoted podcast moment, the line that had earned her the TEDx invite I never received. And now, the video of me saying it first had surpassed 1 million views in less than a day. I hadn't uploaded it, but someone had. Someone who remembered. I leaned back in my chair, a strange ache working its way through my chest. Not pain, more like a release, a shedding. That night, just before dinner, a courier rang the bell. Arden answered. When he returned, he held a white envelope in his hand. The handwriting on the front stopped me. From Seraphine. He handed it to me without a word, watching my face as I turned it over once, then again. "You don't have to open it," he said. I set it on the table, next to my empty teacup. I know, I said. That's why I might. Because sometimes closure isn't for peace, it's for clarity. The letter sat unopened on the counter for most of the morning. I passed it 3 times while making coffee, stepped over it while grabbing my keys, and glared at it while pouring tea I never drank. But eventually I opened it, not because I wanted to, but because pretending it didn't exist made me feel too much like her. Seraphine's handwriting was still that neat, try-hard cursive, like she wanted even her apologies to look curated. Except this wasn't really an apology, it was pages of justification. Everything escalated faster than I expected. I thought you'd moved on. I never meant for it to get this far. And the kicker? Maybe we can both step back and let things calm down. I handed the letter to Arden without saying a word. He read it slowly, lips pressed into a line. "She's not sorry," he said finally. "She's scared." 2 days later, the story broke. It started with a blog post on a mid-tier industry site. A casual entry, nothing accusatory, just reflective. Funny how Seraphine Quinn once declared she wasn't built for marriage, but chased the one man who told her that to her face. The comments exploded. By noon, someone had linked to an old gala photo from 5 years ago, Seraphine leaning in too close to Arden at a fundraiser, and Arden visibly recoiling. Someone dug up the quote from that same night, "I don't do fake." They connected the dots. The same man who rejected her back then had quietly married the sister she'd betrayed. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Was this about love? Or was it always about control? By the next morning, several of Seraphine's brand partnerships had vanished. Her image was scrubbed from promotional reels. A planned product launch was quietly shelved. Online forums buzzed with speculation. A Reddit thread titled "The Obsession with Becoming Solene Hadley" gained traction. I watched it unfold with a strange detachment. I didn't feel victorious, just confirmed. Then came the bracelet. A fashion influencer I followed posted a throwback photo wearing a vintage gold piece Seraphine had once claimed was a gift from her late aunt. But I knew that bracelet. It belonged to my grandmother. I'd seen it on her wrist every Christmas until the year she passed. And I knew, because my name was engraved on the underside, it was meant to be mine. It had been mine. My stomach tightened. I pulled out a copy of the estate inventory. There it was, item number 11. Gold bangle with hand-etched name, left to Solene. Beatrix had taken it from the safe the month after the funeral to have it cleaned. I never saw it again. Until now. The public backlash hit harder than I expected. What else did she steal? Everything about her is borrowed. Is anything real? A comment stood out to me beneath the influencer's post. Reputation is what others think of you. Character is what you know about yourself. Diane von Furstenberg. I copied it into my notes. That night, I sat at the dining table, the light low, Arden flipping through his emails on the couch. I opened my laptop to find an email flagged urgent, a publisher. They'd seen the coverage, read the quotes, watched the video of me from the design lecture. They didn't want a puff piece. They didn't want gossip. They wanted my story. Not Seraphine's version, not Malcolm's silence, not Beatrix's spin. Mine. I read the message twice before looking up. They want me to write it. Arden didn't blink. The world tried to rewrite your ending, he said. Maybe it's time you write your beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to sign my own name. I stared at the blinking cursor on the empty document for a long time before I typed the first line. This is not about them. Then I hit backspace and watched it disappear, because I wasn't writing for vengeance. I was writing for clarity. The morning air in the apartment was still. Arden placed a cup of coffee beside me without saying a word. He always knew when silence wasn't loneliness, it was focus. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and exhaled. This wasn't going to be a tell-all, it was going to be a reclaiming. I began drafting the memoir slowly, not with the betrayal, not with the wedding, but with the little girl who sat in her grandfather's lap, drawing staircases and calling them bridges for the sky. That's where my story really began, long before Seraphine ever decided to steal it. Each paragraph felt like shedding skin. With every sentence, I pulled myself out of the script they'd shoved me into. I was no longer the bitter sister, the jilted woman, the background character. I was the author now. Midway through chapter 3, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it until I saw the name, Malcolm. I let it ring twice before answering. I need to see you, he said, to say some things. We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe in Sausalito, neutral ground. The fog hung low over the water and the wind felt colder than usual. He arrived on time, as always. Still neat, still composed, still wearing that same bland aftershave he used when we were engaged. He sat across from me like a man preparing for a job interview. "I owe you an apology," he began. I didn't interrupt. "I should have stopped it. I knew she was pulling from your work. I knew it wasn't right. He exhaled. "I was afraid of being the villain in the family. I thought if I kept my head down, it would all blow over." I sipped my coffee and watched him squirm. "I don't need your guilt," I said quietly. "I needed your spine, then." He looked away. That was the end of it. Later that week, I boxed up the bracelet, the one Beatrix had taken from the safe. I wrapped it carefully and tucked it inside an envelope with a short note. "I'm not erasing you. I'm just no longer letting you define me." I didn't expect a reply. None came. And somehow, that silence felt louder than any scream. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, the same one I'd avoided during those long months when I couldn't look at myself without seeing someone replaced. Now, I studied the woman staring back, tired but not broken, older but not lesser. Every line on my face was mine, every scar earned. I reached for the velvet box I'd kept at the back of my drawer and opened it. Inside was a ring. Not from Arden, not from anyone, just one I had bought months ago while browsing antique stores. No diamonds, no inscription. Just silver, solid, imperfect, mine. I slipped it on my right hand and smiled. That afternoon, my editor called. "There's a TEDx spot that just opened. They're looking for someone who's lived what they write." I looked at the blinking cursor again. This time, I typed the line and didn't delete it. I was never the woman they wrote about. I was the one writing the truth they were afraid of. Then I closed the laptop and stood. "Let's give them a voice," I said to the empty room, that was never supposed to survive. Because surviving isn't enough. I was ready to speak. The light backstage wasn't particularly warm or inviting, but it was steady, clean, and somehow it felt enough. I stood there, one foot slightly in front of the other, as the stage manager whispered, "You're up in 30 seconds. She gave me a quick smile, the kind reserved for speakers who weren't celebrities, but whose presence carried weight. I wasn't nervous. I didn't clutch my notes. I didn't rehearse a final line in my head. I just breathed, deep and deliberate. When they called my name, I stepped onto the red circle beneath the spotlight, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking into a room that actually belonged to me. I adjusted the mic, smiled softly, and began. They stole my ring, my fiancé, my name, but they couldn't take my voice. There was a pause, small, respectful. Then stillness, the kind of stillness that's earned, not given. I told them about blueprints, not the technical kind, but the emotional ones. The invisible plans we draw for our lives. How we build expectations on foundations we think are solid until someone knocks just hard enough to reveal the cracks. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. I walked the audience through 3 blueprints. The first, my stolen design. I described how it had begun as a sketch on the back of a napkin, a vision of layered light and shelter. How that sketch had been repackaged, relabeled, and sold by someone who had no right to it. The second, my erased engagement. I told them what it felt like to be replaced in a photo before the camera even clicked. How a family can clap for a lie when the truth threatens the image they've curated. The third, my silent years. The time I thought being quiet was noble, that shrinking was polite, that saying nothing was strength. A woman in the front row wiped a tear. A man further back leaned in, elbows on knees, nodding slowly. I glanced at the screen behind me. The final image appeared, a reconstructed overlay of my old engagement photo, this time not as a memory, but embedded into my original design. Soft beams of light crisscrossing through the lines of an architectural dream, holding space for a woman who had once been erased. They tried to burn my memories, I said. I rebuilt them into something they can't touch. Applause began, quiet at first, then rising like a wave. I didn't wait for it to end. I walked off stage, steady and whole. In the green room, my phone buzzed, a message from my mother. "You said too much." I stared at it for a beat before pressing delete. A moment later, a second message popped up. This one from Rupert's old caregiver. He would have stood the loudest. I smiled. I didn't reply. Arden met me by the exit, holding a flat package wrapped in craft paper. He handed it to me silently. Inside was a framed blueprint, my childhood treehouse design, the one I'd drawn in crayon at age 9. Beside my scribbled name was another in fresh ink. His. "You never needed rescuing," he said, "but I'll always stand with the woman who saved herself." We didn't linger. We didn't pose for photos or bask in the glow. We just walked out together. Not into a sunset, but into something real, something I built with my own hands. I wasn't just the girl who lost everything. I became the woman who rebuilt what couldn't be taken from her in the first place, me.